ask questions via chat if you wanted to. If you prefer doing that rather than speaking, you can do either.
Yep, definitely. So welcome everybody. Today we're going to be focused on Reading Horizons Elevate in a virtual classroom. And so we've put out a lot of great content already, but we're going to continue to develop more. And the discussion we had before this recording began was feedback from teachers based on what they're already doing. And so look for more stuff like that. I'm going to share my screen and just mention that on our main website, readinghorizons.com or rhaccelerate.com, you'll see this banner across the top here. And this is going to be our ongoing virtual classroom support page. So we're going to have upcoming events daily, Tuesday through Thursday. We'll have a packed schedule of options. You can attend daily live lessons. You can share those recordings with students. All the recordings will be posted down here in past webinars. And today we're really going to focus on these resources down here. Using Reading Horizons Elevate in virtual schools. We've actually worked in virtual schools for years already. And so we're really leaning on those partners of ours to understand how we can help everyone. And so there's going to be some best practices we go over. That's going to be a great document. Here is what this looks like when you click on it. We have how to help students get to where they left off in instruction. So if you are we're leading more with direct instruction, we're going to walk through how to make those overrides. We're also going to just talk about some quick tips on maybe accelerating students that haven't been using the software. I know we have some people that are more just getting started or bringing new students on that didn't previously have access to this software. And we want to help those students get off to the right start and get more of that accelerated start as needed. We've been working in summer programs for years too, and we realize we don't know how long this is going to happen. As you can tell, Paul and myself are calling you from our homes because many of us are in quarantine. And so we wanted to support it like we would maybe a summer program where we have anywhere from a couple of weeks to a couple of months of supporting this online learning. And then we also have a parent letter. So if you wanted to send it home, we may be past that point, right, where we're actually sending physical copies home, but you can use this as a way to email parents if that, or anyone that you're working with. And it does cover some of the basics too. And this afternoon, one of the webinars we'll be covering is how to work with parents in this virtual setting. So look out for that one too. And if you can't make it, there's, like I said, going to be recordings on this webpage here. So keep coming back here. We're going to continue to fill it up with stuff. And I will go ahead and stop my share. Any questions or comments before we get started? We're going to have Paul start us off going over the getting started, some best practices and tips and tricks for students. But before we do, any questions?
I have a question about the seats in our online Elevate.
Yeah.
And it may just be like a county to county, a district to district decision.
Mm-hmm.
We were given, I think our district purchased 10 seats for each of our schools that use this. However, I serve probably 15 students with the direct instruction.
Yeah.
So I've got like my lowest kids that really need the online instruction with the online instruction right now.
Mm-hmm.
But would there be a way to get more seats while we're in this kind of limbo land?
Definitely. Yeah, we want to help you out with that. So do you know who your sales rep or your customer success manager is?
It was Joe, right?
Oh, Joe. Yeah, that's right. Let's talk to Joe after this, but yes, we can definitely help you out with that.
Okay, perfect.
So that is some, go ahead.
I'm so sorry. Can you show me again, where is that link with the resources?
Can we pull those links into the chat?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and post them in chat right there, right now. But if you ever go to readinghorizons.com or RH Accelerate, it's going to be a banner. Actually, any of our main portals, so RH Elevate, RH Discovery, RH Accelerate, or readinghorizons.com, there's going to be a banner across the top with a link to it, and I just posted it in chat right now. And that's going to be where you can get these ongoing support resources.
And it's under resources, right?
Or sorry, no, it's yes, under resources, the bottom of this page, under resources. Yep, you got it. And
Okay,
then that
cool.
past webinars, you may see some changes as we kind of redesign this page to fit more on it, but the past webinars are gonna grow as well, and you'll be able to access those resources as, like today, we'll be recording and posting it there.
And Kimberly just
Good
asked
question.
if we're going to be discussing one-on-one virtual tutoring.
So what we're going to do today is discuss the student experience in the software, where it's really self-paced, and that's a real advantage to what we have in Reading Horizons Elevate. It's fully instructional, self-paced software that builds from simple to complex. Paul will start us off with that. Then I'm going to discuss some of the settings and then some of the reports you can be looking at to be able to respond to students' needs. So you can immediately or you know, at a given time kind of read reports or get messages in the message center and then reach out to students with what you're seeing data-wise and mentor that way. But this afternoon, we will, and every afternoon, Tuesday through Thursday, we will have online live lessons. And I think that's going to be a good place to get some of that. Like, those are implementation coaches where Paul and I really support all of the tools and the use of our software, and we have a good knowledge of in the instruction. The afternoons are implementation coaches. These are certified national trainers. They go into classrooms and give teachers feedback. So those are going to probably be the ones that help with more of the direct instruction mentoring pieces. So look out for those. Thanks for the good question.
At some point, can we talk more about Classic? Or
Class Kick. That's
Class
Kick.
Kick.
Oh yeah. We'll what we're gonna do is, Caitlin was so good about this at the beginning, and we didn't record it. Caitlin Crawford from Lumpkin. I'm gonna put her on blast here on the internet. We are gonna talk to her afterwards because she's already been doing some really cool stuff, and we want to feature what she's doing in our Teachers League. So that's the other thing is, join us on Facebook on our Reading Horizons Teachers League. I posted it in chat. I'll post it again in chat. We'll put it in the subnotes of this video too if you're watching the recording. But join that because we want that kind of collaboration. We don't have all the answers, and so Caitlin's going to help us out with more Class Kick information. Really, really cool tool. Thank you. Good question. Okay,
Great.
Paul, take it away.
Okay, so Ryan's going to take over asking the question, reading questions from here. I'm going to talk a little bit about best practices, just real quick. It's for spending time with Reading Horizons. You want to do about 30 minutes. Have your students do 30 minutes a day, about 3 to 5 times a week. That's the best practice for doing Reading Horizons. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and jump into the Elevate software. This might be some review for some of you, but I'm just so that everybody knows how to get your students logged in. You want to go to rhelevate.com. This is the same website that you'll use to log in as an admin, the admin portal. You click right here. Ryan's going to go over that later, how the admin side of things. But for students, they need the site login and their student login. A lot of schools will have their student login just be their student ID number. The site login is going to be the same for per school. It links your students to your school. So you can either have your students enter the site login right here, or you can actually put it in the URL up here. So my test account is my first last name. And I put it at the beginning of the URL. So paulmcgrew.rhelevate.com. And you can share this link with your students so they don't have to memorize the site ID. What it does is it automatically populates that site login for them. And then all they have to do is put in their username. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and log in as a test student here. None of these students that I'll be logging in as are real, so we're not sharing any private data. Just has them confirm that they're the correct student there. And the first time they log in, there will be this intro video just explaining the software.
Welcome to Reading Horizons Elevate.
We have 3 narrators. I'm gonna go ahead and exit out of this video.
I'm Michaela.
And I'm Christopher.
So it's pretty heavily narrated software, mostly just audio, but there are some videos like that intro video. The first thing that your students will see every time after that when they log in will be this, my next step. They're gonna wanna hit that go button to go through any pre-assessments or lessons that they'll be taking in the software. It will automatically take them through the sequence of things through this right here. So the first thing that we encounter in the software is a diagnostic assessment. I'm gonna, before I click this go button to show you the assessment, I'm gonna show you this document here. I'm gonna go ahead and also drop this into the chat so that, actually, Ryan, could you drop that into the chat?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yep.
So this is the diagnostic flow chart here. So how this works is that diagnostic is going to test on the 42 skill lessons. And it will adjust those lessons based on their performance in this assessment. It won't override any of the lessons. They'll still encounter the lessons when they come to them, but it could adjust the length of the lessons depending on how they do. So what will happen is when they're taking the assessment, for each skill, they're going to be asked to spell a word. And if they get that word right, they'll just move on to the next skill. And they'll be given minimal instruction on that when they encounter the skill later on. If they get that initial word wrong, then they're going to be still on that same skill. They're going to be asked to fill in the blank word. It lengthens the instruction a little bit for them. If they get that wrong, then they're going to be asked to do a nonsense word recognition. If they get that wrong, they are going to be asked to do a real word recognition. And at this point, whether or not they get that right for that skill, they're going to be given the full instruction for that skill. So to kind of just show you what that looks like, I'm going to go ahead and click this go button here. We're going to get a little bit of an intro here.
Now test your knowledge with a few activities. Complete each one as best you can. If you need to hear the word again, press the replay button.
Okay, we're going to be asked to spell a word.
Cog.
So it asked me to spell the word cog. This skill is spelling with C and K. I'm going to go ahead and spell it correctly. And we're moving on to the next skill.
Spell the word you hear. Club.
This one is L-blends, and I'm going to spell this wrong.
Finish
now
the word. Plot.
We're still on L-blends, and we're doing fill in the blank. And asked me to spell the word plot. I'm going to get this wrong.
Select the nonsense word you hear. Slip.
And now we're doing nonsense word recognition, and I'm going to get this wrong as well.
Select the word you hear. Glad.
And whether or not I get this real word recognition right, I'm still going to be given the full instruction for L-blends when I get to that lesson.
Spell the word you hear.
And now we've moved on to the next skill.
Dropped.
So I'm going to go ahead and that's just to give you a general picture of the diagnostic assessment. This will be really useful for you because there's going to be a progress monitoring assessment at the end of each chapter, and we'll compare their scores in the progress monitoring assessment to the skills they've already encountered in the lesson, their scores for those skills in the diagnostic assessment. And we'll compare those and you can see some gains. And Ryan will go over that when we get to the admin side of things more. But that's why this assessment is pretty important for your students to take. Keep in mind, this assessment, this is important, it takes 60 to 90 minutes to complete. You want your students to understand that if they're not taking it seriously, that it will lengthen the assessment for them. If they're getting those answers wrong, it will lengthen the assessment for them. So I know that's a lot. It's a lot of time to commit initially for your students, and they don't have to take the assessment all in one sitting. They can break it up. It'll save their progress if they log out. but they won't be able to get onto the lessons until they finish the diagnostic assessment, and then there's one other pre-assessment that I'm going to show you as well. This one takes 60 to 90 minutes, and then the next assessment that I will show you is the reading library assessment. It will give your students a Lexile measure for their comprehension. And so I have another fake student set up to show you that. So after they're done with that diagnostic assessment, they'll come back here. And the next thing that will be in their next step is the reading library assessment. We have some
Carefully read
intro
each passage,
here.
then select the word that best completes the sentence. Press the next button to move on.
So the passages that they're going to be asked to read in this assessment are going to start off sort of in medium difficulty. I'm going to just click through here. As they go along, it will adjust based on whether or not they get the comprehension question right. So we can see that it's adjusting in size and complexity. This assessment generally takes 30 to 60 minutes to take. Kind of the opposite of the diagnostic assessment. If they just kind of fly through it and just answer randomly, it'll end really early.
The next button to return to the dashboard.
And probably won't give them a very accurate reading comprehension. So you'll also want to make sure that they understand that they need to be reading those passages and answering to their best of their ability. Okay, are there any questions about these pre-assessments before we move on? You wanted to type any questions about them? I'm going to go ahead and let Ryan interrupt me if you do have any questions. I'm going to move on to the next student just to show you a little bit more of the student side of things.
I'm going to interrupt you. Kimberly had a great question. Do students have to do all the assessments? Can they choose one best for them? And I actually was thinking I'd talk about this when we're talking about settings. And we'll go over, let's table that one for now and talk about that when we're in reports. And I think maybe you could consider it, but just knowing what kind of data you're going to get out of it, let's have the conversation when we're there. Great question. I'm not going to forget it.
Yeah, and feel free to ask that again if we forget to come back to it. Feel free to ask that question again. So next I'm going to show you on the student side of things. Once your students get to chapter 2, they're going to be required to spend some time in our library here. So we have this menu icon here. If I click on that, we'll have some different centers that we can go to. I'm going to go to the library center here. Your students will not have access to the library until they get to chapter 2. But that reading library assessment that I showed you will give them their starting comprehension level in the library. And the reason why we don't give them access to the library is we want them to build some foundational skills in chapter 1 before they're asked to read anything. Okay, so in the library here, if I scroll down a little bit, you can see that there are these colored dots underneath the passages. We have the bronze dot right here. That means these passages are below their comprehension level. They only get 1 point for reading these. And the points here, you see this student I use a lot for tests. So they've completed all their required points for the chapter. But there's a default of 20 points per chapter that they have to earn in the library before they can move on to the next chapter. And they won't be prompted to come to the library until they're at the end of the chapter, but they can go to the library in the middle of a chapter whenever. Okay, so we mentioned bronze difficulty. There are 2 other colors here. We have silver, which is around their comprehension level, and they get 2 points for reading a silver passage. And then gold is above their comprehension level, but not more than 100 points above their comprehension level, because we don't want to overwhelm them with anything. And then if it is over 100 points above, then the passage will be locked for them. So they won't be overwhelmed. And they probably would spend way too much time trying to read it, and it would just not be very productive. So just to show you what it looks like to read a passage, and if you notice here, you can sort by difficulty for these passages. You can also sort by interest, by different topics. So if your students want to learn more about animals, all of these passages here are nonfiction. So they're going to be learning actual facts. About animals. We can learn about unicorns here. So I'm going to click on this passage here. When they click into a passage, they're going to be given the opportunity to review any terms that they might not be familiar with that are related to this passage. They can have the word read to them by clicking on this icon here. And if they click on this magnifying glass, it will decode the word for them. And then it will read them a definition and context. Sometimes there will be a picture.
Hair on the face.
Right here we see a picture.
Tim is growing a beard.
We go back. We click on this preview button here. They'll get a preview of the questions that they're going to be asked after they read the passage. And this is useful because it'll show them what they need to look for while they're reading that passage. If we go back, we can either click back and look at the terms, or we can start reading the passage from here. So I'm going to click start reading. What this does, once I click start reading, it starts a words per minute count timer. And so it's important for our students to read through the passage while they're being timed before they click the start quiz button. Once they click the start quiz button, it ends that timer, and then they'll have the passage and the quiz side by side. But we want them to get an accurate words per minute because it does influence their Lexile score. Sorry, my phone was going off there. So it does influence their Lexile score. The words per minute and the comprehension quiz will update their Lexile score in the library. So I'm just going to go through this. Real quick, this quiz, so we can see.
Answer your real facts about unicorns.
Real facts about unicorns.
That cracked me up, Paul. Like, real facts about real things.
Nonfiction.
And then you picked unicorns. Okay, yeah.
Unicorns.
Didn't know you were a unicorn believer.
This is talking about what people believed about unicorns.
Oh,
so it is still considered nonfiction.
Okay. I'll let it slide. Magical, not real.
I just
completed the required library points for this chapter.
Okay. So now we get the score for that passage here. At this point, they can review the quiz and look at what answers they got correct, which answers they got wrong. They can review any of the skills from the quiz, from the passage. It'll highlight the words for those different skills. They can have the passage read to them now. They would have had to have read through the passage once first before they can have it read to them. But if I click on this, they'll start reading the passage.
Unicorns. A unicorn is a
I'll go ahead and
pretend
go back.
animal.
And then they can start over and they can retake that quiz there. Any questions about the library? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and the last thing I wanted to show you here. If we have time, we can go over some of these things. I'll let Ryan go over some of these things in the admin side. There's a preview content tool that you can use that's really useful. But the last thing I wanted to show you for a student is this student report. This program is designed to be transparent for the student to be able to track their own progress. So they can see their scores for lessons, vocabulary, they can track their library comprehension through the chapters, and they can also see their assessment scores, their test scores. If we click on this drop-down menu, we can look at a specific lesson that the student has taken here and see their score for that lesson. They can also print this report. Now there is a version of this on the admin side that you can access as well that's exactly the same. Okay, were there any questions about the student side of things before I hand over the mic to Brian?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you show us a lesson that's more phonics based?
Yes. Let's see. It might be better for Ryan to do that in the preview content tool.
Yeah, we'll jump into that, and I'll show and I'll show you how you can get in there too. But yeah, we'll focus on that. That'll be maybe one of the first things we do when we get into the admin portal. But yeah, with knowing how you can get there. Okay, good question. Okay, so now I have two I'm carrying with me into my part. It's the talk about initial assessments. Do they have to do all of them? And I just want to talk about the impact of that. And then we want to talk about actually seeing a phonics lesson. So good. Any other questions before we log in as admins and kind of look at that? Okay, not going to question Paul about his unicorn beliefs. Okay. All right, I'll go ahead and share my screen now, Paul.
Okay.
And I am on the home page here. I'm going to log in as an admin instead of a student. And we're going to go over a couple of things. First, I want to point out kind of student settings, going back to some of the documents available on that web page when you go to readinghorizons.com and you click the click here at the top for virtual classrooms. Some of the support resources that we have there at the bottom of the page go over changing student settings, making assignments, that sort of thing. And so I just kind of wanted to talk about the basics there and how you can either get started or make changes to students that are already in the system. So I'm going to click Add Student here, but you could also select students, either all of your students or multiple students that you want to affect some sort of change on, you want to change settings for. And so I'm going to just click Add Student here, just to show you how to do that if you are just getting started or need to add more because you're expanding, because you're trying to reach more now that the classroom environment has changed a little bit. We have first name, last name, login, and then we have their grade level, and that doesn't actually change the scope and sequence at all. That's just trying to group them with other students, like students. You can select their administrator. This matters if you're working with other teachers in your school. Instructor level admins can only see their own students, where site level admins can see all students. So that will matter. And then we do have a Spanish add-on pack, as well as Mandarin and Japanese. If you need, please let us know. In addition to that, as we talk about getting started, really this is all. If you wanted to just let the program go and let it follow sequence, you can do that just by first name, last name, log in, some basic information here, click save, and then what the student needs to log in is their student login and the site login. So you can see here I'm highlighting on the left-hand side, that's my name there, but I've named my site my name. It's probably your school's name or something of the like. They need that site login and that student login, and Paul kind of covered the login process that way. Now, as far as some best practices go, I'm gonna scroll down to the overrides. We're gonna come back to a couple of these settings, but I wanna scroll down to the overrides just to show you how much power you have over the program. You can make significant changes. The default is that the student hits the diagnostic assessment, then the reading library assessment, and then they jump right into instruction. But notice here that the exclamation points, and if we have a master key down here, is required. The asterisk there is optional, and then none of the lessons are locked to start, but you can lock lessons if you don't want students going into certain lessons. So this is where you have control over things. And this is where I kind of want to start by addressing the accelerated recommendations that we have. So after students take the initial assessments, they're jumping into Chapter 1 content, which you probably know is letter groups. We're really getting into all of the letters and the slide rule and building words and nonsense words, spelling with C and K. So those are some of the main concepts taught in Chapter 1. And what you might want to do if your students are a little bit more advanced, you've either covered this in the classroom through another program, or you feel like your students aren't going to engage well in this early content, is make some overrides. And these are the specific ones I'd recommend, because I don't recommend overriding letter group 1. That's going to be where we introduce the slide, combining that initial consonant and vowel sound together, and then adding the consonant at the end of the word. And so we really want to make sure we hit on that. So I don't recommend overriding letter group 1. I don't recommend overriding building words, because that's where we're introducing the mark under the vowel. And I don't recommend overriding nonsense words, because we're going to use a lot of nonsense words throughout the program. Again, we're going to be marking the vowel with an X, calling that vowel out. Now, beyond that in Chapter 1, if you did want to go with this accelerated track recommendation, I might recommend that you make other lessons optional. And I'm going to skip over the quiz. I'll come right back to it. Other lessons optional except for spelling with C and K. So what I said there, to restate, is that if you do want to skip over some of the content in Chapter 1, I recommend you leave letter group 1, building words, nonsense words, and spelling with C and K all as required, because they're important skills that are going to be used throughout the rest of the program. We're building on those skills. Of course, we are with the others, but like I said, they are letter groups, letter instruction, letter formation, letter sounds, and some students may not need that. I have heard that for those that are in that struggling category, it's a big win for them. Chapter 1 can be really a confidence builder. Oh, I can do this. Oh, look how well I'm doing. These students may have struggled with getting good scores in certain subjects. And so having that early win may be just the reason you keep those available, as opposed to those that maybe think this is too kiddish, too below them. That's where you may go with that accelerated track. So those, you have, like I said, ultimate control over making those required, optional, or locked. This is my recommendation for Chapter 1. I left the quizzes, and this is also your decision to make. Each chapter has 2 quizzes, one in the middle of the chapter and one at the end of the chapter. Those are going to be testing the student on skills in isolation, testing those skills they've learned in that chapter in isolation. The chapter test skills in context. And I really like the results from these chapter tests, because they're going to end up in some great reports that you can use to respond to student needs and really check for mastery later on. So I do really like keeping those available. But if you felt, again, that Chapter 1 was just a little bit below the students, you wanted to get them accelerated, you could potentially make those optional or locked. And then we have the progress monitoring assessment, which Paul mentioned earlier, at the end of every chapter. Now, if you were ahead of the students in classroom instruction, ahead of them in software, which isn't the typical, but could happen. Oftentimes with this age group, anywhere from 4th grade to adult, we're leading with software and responding with instruction. So students are working at their own pace. However, if you were leading with instruction and your students are at different levels, you could accelerate them to the point where you left off in the classroom. So to do this, I jumped over to Chapter 3, and let's say that I left off on phonetic skill 1. And I want all of the students I've been working with to just pick up right there when they're working from home. I've selected phonetic skill 1, and below I see the set next button. If I do this, it's going to change every lesson up to this point to be optional. That way they're jumping right in where you left off, and they're just picking up from there. Now, to address a question earlier, when we talked about assessments, the standard recommendation is to not override assessments, just because they're going to be there's going to be very valuable data. I'll throw out a couple of scenarios, but please feel free to reach out to us for more advice or specific advice about your students. The diagnostic, if students are just so frustrated that this is going to ruin their whole experience, they're not going to get into the program because it is a little bit longer. Maybe they're a struggling English language learner, and it's just we know we don't need to adjust the program to them to shorten it. We need them to take every lesson because they are so new to the English language or really struggling. You can lock it or make it optional. I recommend if you do that, that you come back and assign it later, just so you get that data, because what we'll look at in the reports is I think that diagnostic is a roadmap to instruction. It shows the student's needs. But know that if it's going to be students in tears, students not using it, something like that, that you can either make it optional or lock it. I just recommend, like I said, going back at a later date and making the assignment so you get that data, maybe after they've completed chapter 1, for example. The reading library assessment can also be overridden. It can take a while. It can be up to 35 passages with one comprehension question. It's going to give them a Lexile measure. It is our nationally normed measure for this. It was an assessment created by Metametrics. We didn't create it. So it can be one of the best data points that you get. And so to know, if you don't have a beginning measure point, you can't really measure growth that way. But again, this is way more about getting this learning tool into the student's hand, keeping them engaged. So if it is something, if you can assume this is a non-reader or a very low-level reader, then maybe you can assume those gains when they take this assessment later, or you want to come back and assign it after chapter 1, something like that. That's okay too. I really recommend having a conversation with students about why Reading Horizons, what this is going to do for them, and why the assessments are important, and it's okay if they do poorly. Give it your best shot. That kind of conversation to happen early, I think, is going to make a difference, but I understand there's a lot of different scenarios where that could be a thing. So did I answer any follow-up questions to some of my recommendations on overriding assessments or any of the overrides in this student settings section? Okay. Just a couple of other settings mentions here. We have in our recommendations, this document on the resource page for the accelerated track. Oops, sorry, I'm back here. You can reduce the number of library points required. So Paul mentioned gold, silver, bronze. Gold is worth 3 points, silver 2 points, bronze 1 point. If you really want them just in the instruction and not being forced into the library before they move on to the next chapter, you can lower those points. You do have control over games. There are also some additional things here. The library only track, if your student is more advanced and you just want them reading passages to get practice, that's what that is for. So maybe we're reaching a different group of students. I'd say if you have any questions, have them take the diagnostic assessment, then make your decision based on those results, whether they need instruction or not. You can adjust their comprehension level. I'd say talk to your CSM if you have questions. We're going to look at a report about the library, but you can manually adjust it if needed. And then you can adjust when games are available, and you can also see where they're spending their time. So we'll get into that if you notice it's an issue and you want them continuing. Go ahead.
If you do adjust their comprehension level in the student settings, it will adjust it again when they read a passage. So it could. So if you make it a higher comprehension level and they read a passage, that will also change it again. So that's something to keep in mind when you're playing around with their comprehension level.
Great point. Yes, thank you, Paul. That's exactly right. Okay. So going back to class roll, again, you can edit multiple students. So if you saw any of those changes you wanted to make to multiple students, you can check multiple student boxes here and still click that edit students at the top, or you can select all. You can also filter by instructor, by group. You can sort any of these by grade, anything like that. To kind of answer the other question about actually seeing a lesson where we're teaching some of our decoding strategies, I'm going to click on this preview content on the left-hand side. So as I click preview content, you all have access to this. It's as if you have your own student portal to get to, and it is a student that has completed the course. So which is why when I clicked that, it said, "Are you sure?" It just wanted to know that wanted me to know I was leaving the admin portal. And it says course complete, go, because I've completed the course as a student, hypothetically. So what I can do now is browse to any place in the program and have full access to anything here. But let's go to the lessons, and I want to go to chapter 3. And we can see here, I'm going to go to phonetic skill 1. And we can see in phonetic skill 1, I have start lesson on the right-hand side. And this is not the typical, they can't just jump in here and choose which part of the lesson. They're going to follow the sequence put on them based on the diagnostic. So the lesson may look a little different for some students than others. It may be a little quicker, maybe a little longer for some. So, but I, in my view here, can hop in to a specific section and see the instruction happen. Let's see, what do you want to see? Let's go with the skill summary. I'm going to show that here. I'm going to click start and hope that this isn't going to be too loud. Okay, you probably can't hear my screen right now, but it's going to go over phonetic skill 1. This isn't very effective without you hearing the sound. I really wanted to show you how to do this. I'm going to back out, but please let me know if you have a question about the lesson itself. I think you may be best served going through a lesson or parts of a lesson that you really want to see. But please let me know if there's something else I can follow up that answer with. Okay. The other place of best practice, something that as we kind of get into this mode, we don't know how long we're going to be in the kind of this virtual classroom environment. Some states have shut down school through the end of the year already. And so creating good habits on how you're going to interact with the software portal, I think, is going to be a big thing. And I recommend maybe setting a day and a time every week to really spend some time reviewing reports. And our recommendation document mentions Monday morning, having that know how you're going to start the week with your students, review some of this data, and then set a plan with your students for that week. What kind of work you want them doing, how you're responding to that, maybe the needs they have. They haven't mastered everything. And so, but the place I'd start is the message center here on the left-hand side. So this is going to be the place that allows you to see if a skill was failed. We can see here, one of my favorite basketball players, Rudy Gobert, failed a skill within Chapter 6, Quiz 1, and it was actually multiple skills: decoding exceptions, spelling with double S, C, E, and S-E, letter combinations that split, double consonants, and K-E, C-K, K, and C. And so I do not recommend override or resetting quizzes or tests. I recommend addressing the specific skill the student needs help with. And to do that, you can either assign a lesson. You know what, I didn't do that in the settings. I'll show you real quick right after this, but assign a specific lesson without overriding. Just pop them into a lesson that you want to see them improve on, and use this as a guide to that. So we're just trying, the program's trying to provide you with really specific advice, a narrative to make some data-driven decisions with your students. You can see if students maybe aren't spending the amount of time they need on reading passages. They're clicking through too quickly. That's that passage words per minute warning. You can see failed lesson, again, quizzes, and the specifics. And then there are recommendations below. So another recommendation would be responding with some one-on-one mentoring. We talked about that a little bit. Using other tools like Class Kick or Seesaw that we talked about earlier, or using resources on RH Accelerate to provide to that student, practice pages, enrichment resources, and you can send those to the student or the parent, depending on the students you're working with. So the message center, creating a good habit to really stay on top of this. I hear from teachers a lot of the times that they're a little bit overwhelmed when they get in the message center because they haven't been checking it regularly. So now's a good time to reset and start some of those habits as you really want to be in the loop with them, not seeing them every day in the classroom. Just to go over the assign, I'm just going to select a student and click edit. Let's say I saw a skill in the message center that I want to have the student take the lesson for. So if you clicked edit student, you can scroll down to the lesson settings, click this drop down and find the lesson. And this was one of the ones, this isn't the right student, but one of the skills in a quiz in Chapter 6 that was failed. And so if I wanted that student to retake the lesson instead of retaking the quiz, so they're getting instruction, I can select it from this list. And if I go down and I click save, the student, when they log in next, they click that go button, they're going to go into that lesson, they're going to complete the whole lesson, and then no matter where they are in the program, they're going to go right back to where they left off, and it's going to save their progress. So definitely use that forced lesson as a response to some of the things you see. I'm going to go to reports here. I realize we're running short on time, and I'm sorry if I've been a little bit long-winded, but I want to point out a couple of the main reports and know that there's a lot here. And so I really want to drill in on some best reports to review at this time. And I'm going to kind of categorize them for you in a couple of ways. So the reports to kind of check in on how is the student doing generally? Are they using the program? Are they making progress in the program? Not skill specific, but are they plugging away at the program like we set a plan for? We set Paul mentioned earlier, 3 to 5 days a week, 30 minutes, and that's for the software. That's a recommendation for the software. Hopefully some of you, I know already some of you in this video are doing one-on-one mentorship or classroom instruction. So I would say that's in addition to what you're doing in the class. You can just check in on how students are doing using the class roll report, the course progression report, the time report, and the time range report. And the time range is nice too, because you can really set a specific view for what did my students do this last week or this last month. And you can see where they spent their time, how much time they spent. This is my demo class, so it doesn't look like I'm logging in a whole lot. But you can really get specific about where they're spending their time. The other a report that I mentioned earlier, the diagnostic report, this is really going to be your roadmap for instruction. This is going to show a need for students to get instruction in Reading Horizons skills. So you can see, Paul went through this a little bit, the first couple of interactions. The student's going to receive a score for each of these skills, and this is that very first diagnostic assessment. So you can see how your student does on those skills, and then how the class is doing on those skills. And oftentimes what you'll find is a student may do well on early skills, but show significant need later. And that's why I like to call it the roadmap of instruction, really calling out where they're going to need improvement later. But we still want to be careful to build from simple to complex and go through the scope and sequence sequentially, so they get
You
that
want to click on one of the skills?
Go ahead.
To show them how to filter?
Oh yeah, so I see like double SF and Z, right? I'm looking at the bottom of the page here. I see a 68%. That's not great. I want to see, okay, who are my students that have struggled the most with spelling with C and K? And so I can see zeros here, 25s here, 50s, 75. So you can kind of group students that way as well. Good point, Paul. And you can filter by chapter too. This report's going to be a little bit too big to print all at once. You can export it into like an Excel or CSV, but if you go by chapter, you can print this as well. And all your print options are going to be at the top right-hand side if you'd rather work with it that way. So I covered like kind of the check in on the students. How are they doing? Are they making progress? That's the class roll report, course progression, time report, time range report. The diagnostic is kind of that initial, like, where's our roadmap for instruction? Where are we going with these students? The few I really wanted to focus in on is your keeping tabs on their progress with their skills. Are they mastering skills? Are they making gains? Because that's the goal with this learning experience. So the skill gains report is the first report I'll click on for that. And you can see the student does need to be making progress, completing chapters. That's how they're going to get these kinds of scores. And you can see here the overall diagnostic score. That's based on what we just saw in the diagnostic report, but we're going to have it by student overall. And that's just with all 42 skills are tested on. The current diagnostic report and the progress monitoring score is based on where they are in the software. So you can see if they've just finished chapter 3, that's going to be based on the skills in chapters 1, 2, and 3. This is their diagnostic score, and this is their progress monitoring score. So if they're not scoring 100%, that's where you get more involved to say, okay, they've received instruction, they got this progress monitoring at the end of a chapter, but they still didn't spell the word that applied to that skill. Can I help the student out with that skill? And so we can see here too, that if we click on, I'm going to click on a demo student here. On the left-hand side, we can see how they've done individually. Go ahead.
I had noticed that the criteria was set at 80%. So if they achieve 80%, then the skill is considered to be achieved, and then they move on. Is that what that means?
Great question. Yeah. So that is the passing score.
Okay.
You'll notice, let's see, we'll go to another report in a minute. You'll notice that 95% or higher when you're viewing reports has a star. And they'll also get badges in the software, rewards for 95% or higher scores. So while 80% is passing, 95% is considered mastery.
Okay.
So the reason, and you can adjust that score. That's up to you. You can make those changes. Reading Horizons Elevate is a program that forces the student to get that passing score before moving on. So if they don't get it, they're taking that lesson multiple times. That's also going to be a reason that setting good habits in the message center is important. I feel bad for a student that is really just struggling with the concept. For some reason, the software isn't getting it done for them and they can't get it, and they're not getting that master, that 80%, and they're retaking a lesson too many times. That's why the message center is going to be helpful to say, oops, the students failed this lesson maybe a couple of times. Let me talk to them. I want to reach out to them and just kind of see how they're doing. So we try to give you that kind of warning. And it's also the reason that I don't normally recommend raising it too high. Instead, if they pass it, but they're still struggling a little bit, and we can look at a couple reports here, that's where you really get involved as the teacher and say, hey, let's talk about this. Hey, let's reassign it. Hey, let's jump online for some instruction or mentoring, something like that. Did that answer
your question?
Yes, I'm sorry, I unmuted it.
Cool.
Yes, that does.
Oh, you're fine. Thank you for asking. It's a great question.
Thank you.
So actually, to kind of piggyback on that, we talked about the skill gains report. That's that chapter by chapter kind of progress monitoring. Are the students progressing, making gains? The group skills report is the one that I think really pairs with the conversation we just were having of, okay, my students pass the lessons, they're making progress, but are they really mastering the skills? And this is why chapter quizzes and tests are so important. We're going to take those quizzes, skills in isolation, and test skills in context, and create a report for your class to see how your class is doing on skills, and how, I'm going to hop to chapter 3 here, how the class is doing on skills. And then also, if I'm seeing, adding suffixes to phonetic skill 1 and 2, kind of a low overall score as a class, I can click this drop down and I can see why that score is what it is. And I can see, Quinn Snyder, Rose Reeds, Peter Parker, and Rudy Gobert could all really use some help with this skill. Now, why are they able to have a 42% and they've moved on past this point? Well, it's because it's a quiz or a test, and they could have passed it overall. Actually, the quizzes don't necessarily need to be passed, but they could have gone past it, but scored low on this individual skill, but still had a cumulative score specifically for the test. They could have passed that test, but failed the skill. And this is where the program's trying to help you out, call that out for you. So this is a great tool, especially if your class is in similar places or you're reviewing old content, to say, I want to look back at chapter 2 and see if my students have really mastered some of these things. Maybe this whole coronavirus quarantine thing is an opportunity for me to go and check up on some old skills, refresh them, and get some online instruction going around some of these things. So possessives, for example, not a lot of students have taken possessives, but you can see my point here is you can really capture how your class is doing on a skill. And that's based on quizzes and tests being completed. So you're not going to have a full report until the chapter's been completed by a student. Okay, and then the other one that I like to look at as a group is the Lexile, and that's just, again, our students making gains. And the Lexile is going to be assigned, that's the reading library assessment, at the beginning, middle, and end of the program. And you can see, and you can always sort. You see me doing this sometimes, and I maybe didn't call it out, but we can sort by different categories, and you can see their beginning score, their middle score. If we had an ending score, it would show here. You can see their Lexile gain here. And then we're also going to call out the library level and the library gain. So that's the passages that Paul was going over, and we're going to show that report here too. I'm going to wrap up in just a few minutes. So if you have to leave, don't worry, that's okay. But I wanted to just finish out some of these reports and then make time for some questions at the end. So thanks for bearing with me. Because now what I want to do is go into some individual reports that I think are going to be helpful. So you've really seen the class view, you've seen the progress they're making, and some of the skills that they maybe need help with. But I want to find out how they are doing on the skills themselves without viewing it as a whole group. And this skills report, student skills report, gives more details. So it doesn't just give, this is how Alani is doing on letter group 2 or R blends. It's this is how Alani is doing on overall R blends and then each of the R blends. And so you can really get specific with students as you're trying to help them out. And as you can scroll through here, you can see all those stars showing mastery, but also some of the skills that are in need, they're in need of help with. And then the other I like to really look at is this library report, because in this kind of a virtual setting, you may not be hearing them read as much. Again, using tools like ClassKick or Seesaw, things like that, Zoom like this could be a good way to do it. But having the option to view, and let's see, let me get a better student.
It looks like we have another question.
Go for it.
Why is it that, and this is from Irene Sandoval, why is it that the individual student report that I print out for my students that shows they are low in certain skills is different from what shows on their screen and it shows they passed it?
That's a good question, and it may be related to the reports. Is it the student skills report or the group skills report that you're referring to as the scores being different?
Yes.
Okay, good question. So that's going to be based on the quizzes and the tests. So they're going to see like, these are my lesson scores, right? This is how I scored on R blends on the lesson. And you can see that too. So for example, like I'll hop back. Hopefully I can't remember what student I was just on, but you can see in the lesson summary report, this should match. I need to get some better demo students. I apologize. Here we go. Here's some more scores. This should match what they're seeing right here. This score, the time, the date completed. So you can see all of those results. I was really focusing in on this report here, the student skills report, because it takes the quizzes and the tests and it breaks out those pieces. So there are at least 3 questions asked per skill to get a sample size to provide you data on. I hope I said that right, but that's the idea, is that within these quizzes and tests, each of these skills is tested enough to give you back data to then see here and make decisions. So they're not going to see anything like this. This is the data-driven part of your tool that you can say, okay, they passed R blends, right? They got an 85%, or they showed 85% proficiency within the quizzes and the tests. They could have got a 90% in the lessons. That's a different score that they're seeing. But on our blends, quizzes and tests, they got 85%. But they need help with CR, PR, and TR. And so that's the tool in your hands to say, yes, they passed, yes, they're doing well, but can I kind of help elevate them to a level of mastery where maybe when they get that in a passage, they're still going to stop. They're still going to struggle. Or when they have to spell a word with that skill, they're still going to struggle. And so this is your way to respond to that.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Good question. Thank you. The last thing is the library report. And I found a student with 2 results here, so we can see the pre and the mid. The library report, though they haven't, for some reason I'm not seeing all of my quiz type item types on the student. There are 5 quiz item types, and you can see the scores for each here. We have the pre and the mid and the post Lexile assessment. That's a reading comprehension assessment they're taking at the beginning, middle, and end. And then we have their by chapter library results. So we can see their Lexile measure, and we can see their words per minute that they're reading. We can see the 5 different organizational devices. Let me, Paul, do you have a good student that I can maybe refer to? Here we go. This is better. So we have all 5 organizational devices here. Inference being the biggest need for this student, right? And organizational devices, or sorry, quiz type items. And so we can really dial in with a student on any of these. We can also see how they're approaching reading. This red means they're clicking through it, probably not reading it or reading it too quickly, which is probably resulting in lower comprehension scores. So you can really see their approach to reading it with this report and really respond to their needs. This is a great place when the questions I get from teachers are, why is my students' reading library lexile going down? And I look at this report and say, well, looks like their words per minute are really high. It looks like their comprehension score is low. A lot of the times it's a conversation with that student to say, hey, I can see what's going on in the library. I want you to give it a better effort. I want you to go back and read these couple of passages. You could create writing prompts based on those kinds of assignments too. So things to consider, but a great report to review to get to some of that kind of data-driven direct instruction and conversation. Okay. I know that was a lot.
Lauren raised her hand again.
Go for it.
Sorry, guys. I have another question. A lot of my students are required to read from their classroom teacher. So is there a way just to lock out the entire library so that they can just focus on the fundamental skills?
Yeah.
You can disable the library.
You can
just disable it.
You can just disable it. So that's a great question. Down here in the library settings, you can turn it off all the way. You could go the opposite direction with it and have the program only focus on the library. And you can hide passages. You noticed when Paul was showing that we have the passage next to the questions, because that's what a lot of standard testing is. But if you wanted those to be separate and didn't want them to be able to refer back, because sometimes they're just clicking through, not reading the question, trying to find it in the text. If you wanted to make that change, you could. Not my normal recommendation, but it's an option.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. Thank you for asking.
Great question.
Okay. And for those that did happen to pop in at some point in time, I think we have the original group here for the most part. But anyone popping in or anyone wanting to go back and see this again, we will have this posted online later today on that resource page. Again, that's if you go to Reading Horizons or any of the Reading Horizons websites, but readinghorizons.com, at the top there's going to be that banner that says click here for virtual classroom support. So, okay. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you're very busy, even though times are changing. There's a lot for us to do, so I appreciate you spending your time with us, and also really appreciate what you're doing for your students. I love that learning is continuing. This is challenging, but we're so happy to support educators like you in what you're doing. So feel free to provide us with feedback, things that you were not doing that you see that we could help you with. And then feel free to line up a personal time with your customer success manager to go through any of the specifics or any of your setup, or talking about licenses and reaching all of your students in these kinds of remote settings. We want to help you with that. So we'll call it there. Thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And I will make a Loom for Class Kick so that they can see my screen and they can go through and they can see like all the specifics, and as well as post all of those links on the Facebook page.
I love it. Thank you so much. You are an all-star. That's actually something we call people sharing like that. That's an official title for us. So Joe's gonna talk to you about that. We'll get you hooked up with some things too. And thank you for sharing. I learned a lot from that. I'm excited.
No problem.
That's a really great resource.
Yeah. Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.